minutes after 10 is the time, and it doesn't matter is the desperate hope of an increasing number of politicians, largely of the Conservative persuasion. I am going to do something I don't often do today on the programme. In fact, you can hear by the sound effects in the background that I'm slightly adjusting my desk and moving that, that to there, and I'm going to try to keep a closer eye on my inbox than I usually do or can. The switchboard gets so busy these days that, as you will know, if you're kind enough to text me or indeed tweet me occasionally, then it's unlikely I notice. But that would be the easiest way today for me to see you reminding me of anything I might have missed. I'm going to try and run through a catalogue of cronyism and corruption allegations. But I am going to keep one eye on that part of my screen so that I can hopefully be reminded by you if I forget anything. Where shall we begin? I think I'm going to begin with Sir John Redwood, and there is something that almost all of the most egregious accused have in common that I will do my level best not to mention until approximately 27 minutes past 10, but you will probably spot the word that runs through them like the word Blackpool regularly runs through a stick of rock. I'm going to start with Sir John Redwood because this is the one that made me do a double take. I should stress I have double checked, but it could be a typo that has been reproduced by reports. So it may turn out, because I find this so hard to believe, that I am more than happy to acknowledge that there could be some sort of typo here. Because he gets £48,222 per quarter from the Investment Committee, his chairman indeed, of Charles Stanley Investment Committee. He has said, my duties are to write a twice-weekly market review and investment report, to chair the Investment Committee and to make oral and written presentations. And that's fine, right? So he gets just shy of 50 grand per quarter. Wait for it. For 50 hours of work a month. And this is the bit where I think there must be some sort of typo there. He was getting £15,606 a month previously, which is roughly £46,818 per quarter, and that's now gone up to £48,222. Now, when I was joking earlier with or about Nick and myself only doing 60 hours a week, it was kind of true. You know, the meter is only ticking for us for the 60 hours a week that we're on air. We do other bits and bobs on top, of course, some years, some months more than others. But the 3 hours a day that we're on the radio, that 60 hours a week is our major income. 60 hours a month is our major income. John Redwood is a member of Parliament. He has a constituency. He also gets other emoluments. Is that the correct pronunciation? I don't know. But that, I'm going to begin there. I'm going to ask you at some point which of these stories you think is... There's two elements to the question, actually. Which is the most egregious? Which is the most traffic stopping? Which is the one that actually makes you go, what? And the second question would be, which is the most important stroke significant? Because I don't think they're the same. This is not the one that I think is the most important or significant, but it is the one that makes me go, wow. Because it's in plain sight. This is what I found so weird about Dominic Raab's defences yesterday of transparency. I think he was wrong. I don't think it was known that Sir Geoffrey Cox was phoning in his votes from the British Virgin Islands. I don't want to jump the gun on him. He's coming up in a moment. But when Raab said it was transparent, he was referring to the register of members' interests, not the actual geographical location of MPs drawing down salaries of a piffling 80 grand while trousering £400,000 for doing legal work on behalf of a government accused of corruption. So I find the 50 hours, the fact that he could write it down, the fact that he could just throw it into the mix, this reminds me of the expenses scandal, where it wasn't so much the detail that was shocking as the presumption that it was all perfectly above board and normal. I've slightly changed my view on the expenses scandal as the years have passed, but that's by the by. What shocked us at the time was the fact that it was in plain sight. It was hiding in plain sight. So John Redwood filled in a form, and I have to keep saying, because do you know what? Do you know how mad I am? Mad as in bananas, not mad as in furious. That comes a little bit later in the hour, if yesterday is anything to go by. I don't believe it. I actually don't believe it. So I keep saying it may well turn out to be a typo, because part of me is thinking that in the next 14 minutes, a text is going to drop or a message is going to come into the studio saying, we've had a look at this and it was 5 hours a month. I mean, quite what on earth you could do for 5 hours a month to draw down 50 grand a quarter is currently beyond me. Even Nick Ferrari doesn't get paid that sort of money for 5 hours work. But I can't believe the 50 hours. Yesterday it was the amount of money that was shocking. It was Geoffrey Cox making £1 million on top of being an MP. Today it's John Redwood. They've both got knighthoods, for God's sake. Today it's John Redwood being able to put in 50 hours of work a month. 50 hours a month. I don't actually believe it. I think there must be a typo. I think at any minute now we're going to get a call and they're going to say, oh, don't worry, everyone relax. I know it's been reported in all the newspapers, so you haven't actually done anything wrong, but it's 5 hours a month. Phones aren't ringing. It's not coming in yet. Wow. So 50 hours. I find that almost unbelievable. The simple fact that he considers his duties as an MP to be so trivial that he's got 50 hours spare every month to work for this investment bank. He also works for others. He gets another 5 grand a year as a member of the advisory board of a private equity company, and a bonus of 35 grand from the original company, and he made £439.86 in book royalties. So at least there's one corner there where I can knock him into a cocked hat. 10 minutes after 10 is the time. So there you go. So we get Redwood on the list. Daniel Kawczynski. Can you spot what the word is yet that runs through this lot like Blackpool runs through a stick of rock? You'll remember him. He is the one that was accused of not offering a sincere apology in the House of Commons after he was found guilty of bullying. Again, so was Priti Patel. So, you know, it's almost like every stone you look under has got 10 more stones under it that you need to then look under. And every time you look under one of the 10 new stones, you find 10 more stones to look under, all of which are hiding murk and grimness. But she concluded that he'd acted in a threatening and intimidated manner. But on the same day that he gave the apology, he admitted he was only going through the motions to avoid being suspended. That was picked up by the Daily Mail. Now he's facing another investigation, the second in 5 months, for actions causing significant damage to the reputation of the House. That's not the only story involving him. He has also... I'm not going to be able to keep on top of this, seriously. He is also going to be in... or at least it is being reported that he has interests, or he gets paid by a mining company, and there are suggestions that he may have made interventions on their behalf, suggestions that he denies. I've already got it. I've blown it already. What is it, 11 minutes after 10? I've already lost one of the strands of the story. I've already lost one of the stones that I was looking under because I got distracted by all the new stones to look under that I found when I lifted up the last stone we were looking under. Are you still with me at the back? So I'll get back to that one. So we've got Redwood. We've got Kawczynski. Here is a Tory MP who was retained as an advisor by a company, a job for which he received £20,000 a year. His name is Steve Brine. In February, he took part in a video conference with the company that pays him £20,000 a year for 8 hours work a month, and Nadeem Zahawi, the vaccine minister at the time. And that was in February. And lo and behold, in April, the company won a £100,000 government contract to deliver lateral flow tests to pharmacies. It could be, of course, a complete coincidence, but I think Angela Rayner is quite right to insist that we need an investigation to be sure. So we'll put Brine on the list, and here he is, Ian Duncan Donuts. It's almost like night following day. Ian Duncan Smith is facing questions over his £25,000 a year second job advising a multi-million-pound hand sanitizer firm after he chaired a government task force that recommended new rules benefiting the hand sanitizer firm that pays him £25,000 a year for consultancy work. This is a reference to his chairing of the Task Force on Innovation, Growth and Regulatory Reform, which essentially came forward to recommend alcohol-free sanitizers, hand sanitizers, should be formally recognised in the UK while being paid by a company that makes them. So that's Redwood, Kawczynski, Brine, Duncan Smith. I still think Redwood, simply because of the 50 hours. That's just so unbelievable. But the Duncan Smith one, actually chairing a government task force, I think what gets me the most, and I suspect what gets you the most, is the fact that this is out there. It's weirder than if it was hidden. You know, a traditional scandal involves blowing the bloody doors off, right? To bowdlerise Michael Caine in the Italian Job. A traditional scandal involves blowing the doors off. These are things that this lot thought was fine. This is the Pattersons. This is why it all goes back to Owen Patterson saying, after being busted, that he'd do it all again tomorrow. They don't think they're doing anything wrong because they are, I think, just so entitled. So Duncan Smith chairs a government task force that delivers incredibly good news for a company that pay him 25 grand a year to consult. Scotland Yard is assessing a complaint against the Conservative Party over the fact that 15 of the last 16 Tory treasurers had been offered a seat in the House of Lords after each donated more than £3 million to the party. So we'll put the House of Lords on the list. Redwood, Kawczynski, Bryan, Duncan Smith, Lords. Sir Geoffrey Cox, I told you we'd come back to him. How many times do you think he voted in person in 13 months during the pandemic? Go on, seriously, have a guess. How many times do you think he turned up in the House of Commons and actually voted? How many days? How many days? On how many days over a 13-month period do you think Sir Geoffrey Cox, who I misrepresented yesterday as being the MP for North Devon, it's, I think, Totteridge and West Devon, although geographically speaking, it is kind of in North Devon, but the point is I named the wrong constituency. How many days out of 13 months, what's that roughly? That's sort of 130, about 190 days, isn't it? 13 months, give or take, I think. No, it's got to be more than that. It's 360... Never do maths live on the radio, Keith. That is the only bit of advice I will ever give you. 13 months, so it's going to be 365 days plus 30 days, 395 days. That'll do. About 395 days. Admittedly, not all of them would be days when Parliament was open, but taking 13 months as a broad baseline, how many days do you think Geoffrey Cox actually went into Parliament and voted on out of 13 months? From June 2020 to July 2021. Now, you were allowed to use proxy voting. Let's make that absolutely clear. It's not like everybody else was queuing up to do 2. Even I haven't got the energy to build up any suspense on this one. 2 days, 13 months, £1 million. I don't know how long it would take you to earn £1 million. It took Geoffrey Cox a year while he was also an MP. I don't know how long it would take you to earn 50 grand. It takes John Redwood 3 months while he is also an MP. And he gets it for doing 50 hours work a month while he is also an MP. Do you see what I mean yet about the real offence here being the fact that it's in plain sight? The fact that they have essentially waved it under our noses and told us that there's nothing to worry about. Lawrence Robertson, £24,000 a year by the Betting and Gaming Council, an industry body that lobbies on behalf of bookmakers. Ready for this? Over the past year, he has warned ministers that there is a great danger that stronger gambling laws could lead to more players using the black market and suggested that there is not enough evidence to warrant greater regulation of the industry. He denies any conflict of interest. So, here is a gambling firm. Here is Lawrence Robertson. The firm gives him £24,000 and then he makes arguments about how it would be a very bad idea to regulate gambling more stringently than we currently do, but claims, and this is where he waves it under your nose, there is absolutely no conflict of interest. Is anyone keeping tabs on this? We've done Cox, right? We've done the Met looking into the Lords. Let's put him on the list as well. So Cox and Robertson, the House of Lords, Duncan Smith, Bryan, Kawczynski, Redwood. You can tell this isn't the BBC, can't you? I'd have a team of researchers knocking this together for me. I'm doing it all with a bunch of things I've just cut out of the newspapers on one single morning. One morning. We're only 17 minutes into the programme. And then you have the other list of MPs trousering sums of money that most people can only dream of for doing work that remains... Well, here's another one. Fiona Bruce, Conservative Congleton, carried on working for her own law firm, having become an MP, and I've got the figure, £219,991.54. I don't know what is happening. I don't know how we've kind of just not noticed this. Guilty, as charged, me personally. I don't know how we've not noticed this. I don't know whether there's been a flurry of revelations. They've been writing down it in the last couple of weeks because they've seen what's happened to Patterson and they've thought, well, we better get it all out there. And then Big Dom Raab can go around claiming that actually we should all be praised for our transparency. And I don't know if I've covered everything that I wanted to cover when I sat down. Oh, I haven't. 18 minutes after 10, you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC, and I have not yet shared with you the one that I think is the worst of all. The one that I think cuts to the very heart of what I would call, reluctantly, democratic decline. Something that suggests to me there is something very, very rotten in the state of Britain. Minutes after 10 today, just in case you're getting excited, there's no PMQs today because they are in recess. I mean, scheduled and long known, but I can see some people getting excited about the thought of PMQs being informed by some of the revelations that have emerged this week. There won't be one. I'll run quickly through some numbers. So, Sir Geoffrey Cox, the top 10 MPs who have earned or will earn the most from outside work in 2021. This is on top of the £81,932 that they earn as MPs. We are now, of course, in November, so this is retrospective with, I presume, a tiny side order of speculation on what is likely to come. So Geoffrey Cox, 587,000. I'll round down or up. Theresa May, 497,000. John Redwood, 228,000. Fiona Bruce, 219,000. Andrew Mitchell, £183,000. Sajid Javid, £180,000. Sir John Hayes, £119,000. Richard Fuller, £109,000. Mark Garnier, £100,000. And Chris Grayling, £100,000 as a strategic advisor. Two words that you would never ordinarily associate with Chris Grayling if you lived to be 504 and you only had two words in your vocabulary. Strategic advisor to a ports company. For 7 hours of work a week, he gets £100,000 a year. But, and yes, I will open up the phone lines, and yes, I will take your calls, and yes, I will remind you of the question that I'm actually asking in a minute. But first, I think this is huge. I could be wrong, you know me. Put it all out there, and then if circumstances demand, I'll reclaim some of it and crawl some of it back. But I think this is huge. Next week, the House of Commons will have a vote on, probably on Monday, it will lay a motion that would rescind the formation of the new Standards Committee that was voted for last Wednesday. Last Wednesday. Wasn't it? So barely a fortnight, not even a fortnight will have passed before Boris Johnson's government whipped MPs to vote for a ripping up of the rule book regarding corruption and a reprieve, at least temporarily, quite possibly permanently, for an MP found to have acted egregiously, namely Owen Paterson. And within less than a fortnight, they're going to do the precise opposite. They are going to whip their... Well, I presume they're going to whip their MPs, otherwise there's not much point introducing the motion, is there? They're going to whip their MPs to vote in precisely the opposite way. And they're not doing it because they've had a change of heart. They're not doing it because they've had a fit of the vapours or because they've had a crisis of conscience. They're not doing it because they consider the facts to have changed and therefore they have changed their minds. They're doing it because Boris Johnson thought he could pull yet another fast one, and this time, for reasons we've explored together, but which we will never know for sure, this time it didn't wash. This time we decided we would not put up with it. The idea that you could lose a football match 3-0 and then rewrite the rules of football and declare that you had secured a victory finally broke the patience of much of the population. So on Monday of next week, they will encourage their party, encourage their MPs to vote in exactly the opposite way to how they voted last week, which poses one absolutely crucial question. Poses two absolutely crucial questions. What do they stand for, these people? If they can undertake a U-turn so complete and so crushing in such a short period of time, solely as a response to misjudging public opinion, getting their populist playbook wrong for once, what do they stand for? They stand for nothing but themselves. And you will probably, I pray, that you will never get more coruscating evidence of that than this. Within a fortnight, they will march their troops to the top of the hill and march them down again, while claiming that both positions are valid, viable, even perhaps valuable. And the second question is this: what is the point of Parliament? If Boris Johnson's whims are indulged by its members, if Boris Johnson can march them up to the top of the hill on a Wednesday and march them straight back down again on a Monday, what is the point of Parliament? What is the point of these MPs? What is the point of their first job, never mind their second job, if they can undertake a U-turn so complete and so crushing in the space of less than a fortnight? What is the point of Parliament? I don't know if they constitute phone-in topics. What is the point of Parliament? You can have a crack at it if you want. 0345 60 60973. I don't know if you want to have a crack at answering the question, what on earth do they stand for? But I don't think we will ever see more compelling evidence of a complete corruption of parliamentary democracy than a government that will instruct its MPs to vote one way on a Wednesday and then entirely the other way 2 Mondays later. I can't conceive of circumstances that highlight more completely how absolutely ridiculous we have been rendered by this Vote Leave government. You vote this way or you are for the high jump. You vote this way or you lose your job in government. You vote this way or we will, it has been reported, remove funding from your constituency before the next election, so you'll probably lose your seat. You vote this way or we will come down on you like a ton of bricks. And through the lobby they go. Through the lobby they go. It blows up in a way that none of them had foreseen because it was done entirely upon the Prime Minister's whim. And within a fortnight, they're being ordered to vote in exactly the opposite way. On the question of whether or not we should rip up the rule book that deals with corruption allegations and give a free pass to a bloke who's just been found to be as guilty as sin of riding roughshod over the requirements of MPs when it comes to lobbying. It's 10:30 and I have barely drawn breath, but even I get tired of the sound of my own voice sometimes. So after the break, I want you to answer these questions. How has this happened? Just talk me through it. Pretend I've been asleep for a month or a year or a decade. How has this happened? And how can we have a system in which the people who are charged to safeguard our democracy can turn upon a sixpence in the blink of an eye while also filing 50 hours of work a month for extremely lucrative extra jobs? But I also want to know, which is the one for you? And this is the question I want you to come in on first. Out of all the things I've just listed, and thank you for listening, thank you for indulging me, feels like therapy some days. Out of all the ones we've just listed, which one gets your goat the most? 0345 60 60973. And in a constitutional or historical context, which of these stories, these scandals, whether actual or still bubbling under that status, which do you think is the most significant? Which speaks most loudly of the broader malaise? Which of these individual stories excites you the most, gets your goat the most, sticks in your craw the most stubbornly? 0345 60 60973. And which of these stories, to you, is most emblematic of the bigger picture? 0345 60 60973. And I'll apologise in advance for all the stories I have missed or forgotten, because there's bound to be some. Thomas Watts is here now with your headlines. 5 minutes after 11 is the time. And of course, as Steve has pointed out, in the interest of balance, I should add that David Lammy presents a 2-hour radio show on LBC. Yeah, that's the balance. So which of these stories offends you the most? John Redwood, the 50 hours a month he can somehow find to do on top of his MP's duties. The Daniel Kawczynski story involving boasting almost about how he only issued an apology to staff who'd been found guilty of bullying because he'd been ordered to do so. And there is another element to that one as well involving mining, which I shall find. Which one is it? Is it Geoffrey Cox sitting in the Caribbean when he should have been in Devon? Is it Ian Duncan Smith, 25 grand a year from a company that benefited from recommendations that came from a government task force he actually chairs? They all deny conflicts of interest. But they would say that, wouldn't they? Alison's in Falkirk. Alison, what have you got?
Yeah, thanks for taking my call, James. I'm a bit starstruck. I've been listening for long enough.
It's only me.
I know.
Well, you didn't just speak to Keith, did you, on the way through?
No.
Oh God, because then I could understand you being starstruck. But this is well. Thank you very much indeed. What made you pick up the phone?
It's Ian Duncan Smith, because he's the architect of universal credit.
Yes, he is.
And the rules are, in universal credit, as has been widely reported, that if you take on work, you lose money from your credit.
Yes.
So why the hypocrisy of trousering 80 grand a year to do a vital and important and necessary job and not losing any money but taking on as much extra money as you can possibly get? Why is there one rule for those entitled wealthy knobs and a different
with
rule?
No knobs,
for,
no K. Just for anybody who's or is it the other way around?
Yes.
It's the synonym for a toff is what we're referring.
toff.
Yes, just
So
for younger listeners, they may not be familiar with the argot.
Yes,
Alison, I want to make that quite clear. Go on.
So you need to beep me out, but and I might want beeping for a little while.
No, please don't.
Why is it one rule for them and another rule for hard-working people who are just trying to scrape by?
Clearly there is a double standard in place here. I don't know if we dig into the detail of your specific allegation, if it's entirely fair. I mean, he's not claiming anything in what you and I would loosely describe as welfare payments or benefits, is he?
Mm-hmm. No.
So that is the balance there. But here, can I read you something? I've been keeping some of my powder dry, Alison. Mm-hmm. The company he gets £25,000 a year from sent a message to investors after the task force that he chairs for the government, along with former ministers George Freeman and Theresa Villiers. They sent a message to their investors after the recommendations came down from the task force that he chairs and gets paid £25,000 by this company. And the message said, influential UK government-sponsored task force has recommended a regulatory green light for alcohol-free hand sanitisers. Its directors were also quoted in a report saying that it delivered a powerful boost to the firm. And nobody from Ian Duncan Smith down, nobody thought, well, this can't be right. We can't be paying him 25 grand a year to chair a task force that has just delivered what the directors of the company that pay him call a powerful boost to the company that pays him. These are the moments where I wonder whether I'm losing my grip on reality.
I mean, I'm safely ensconced in Scotland, and I look south of the border, and I cannot understand how anybody would vote for these people. I really don't get it, but I suspect the word that's running through the middle of them like a black...
No, it's only 39. I don't know, you can't do that yet. Does it begin with B?
It certainly does.
Right, don't keep your powder dry, please. No, I don't know what you're talking about. I have no idea what it could possibly be that links Ian Duncan Smith and John Redwood and Daniel Kaczynski.
And how many of them have got offshore businesses?
Well, I don't know. I don't know, but I'll find out. I mean, these things are supposed to be declared. It doesn't matter whether you've got an offshore business or not. If you're Sir Geoffrey Cox, you've got an offshore office. You're literally sitting in the British Virgin Islands, working on behalf of their government, helping it deal with allegations of corruption that have essentially been levelled by the British government, of which until Boris Johnson fired him earlier this year, he was an integral part. 10:40 is the time. Alison, thank you. Murray is in Hertford. Murray, what is going on?
Oh, there you are, James. Last time I spoke to you, you were working from home, I think.
I probably was.
Changed.
Crikey, that was a while ago. From the shed, if you prefer.
Oh, a shed, yes, a man cave.
Go on you hurry.
OK, do you know what it is that sums up, of all of the scandals that we've had, of all of the greed, and that's what it is for these, maybe the smallest one financially gives the biggest picture of where these people are at.
Go on.
Because if it's not making money for themselves, it's got to be making money for their muckers. And we know about Dirty Desmond and Jenrick on the 45 million. But the one that got me was Matt Hancock and Gina, whatever her name was, I can't remember. Not only did he manage to inveigle his girlfriend into his life, so he could have his extramarital affairs.
Well, we don't. Again, I don't know. When I said hurry up, I did mean it. We don't know the direct chronology of when the affair started and when she came to work as an advisor. The affair could have started after she came to work for an advisor. But just run through the detail of the thing that has stuck in your craw.
Okay. If I'm right in thinking, she is part of the a big shot, Oliver Bonus, wealthy person.
But she was married to the founder of it. I'm at the risk of sounding like a stuck record. Hurry the flip up, will you?
Okay. Managed to get her in. That wasn't enough. what does he then have to get a person who's incredibly wealthy? £15,000 annual allowance out of the taxpayers' money. So it wasn't enough.
So she got paid for being an advisor. That's what you're objecting to.
Got paid for being an advisor.
Okay.
Now, if anyone else was thinking I can keep this,
no, you've got there in the end. I don't know that it was worthy of building up quite that much suspense. Not least because she was doing a job. Whether she was qualified to do it or not is a question for the ages. But the idea that she shouldn't have been paid for doing it's a little odd. But thank you, Murray. Mark's in Chertsey. Mark, what do you reckon?
Well, I'm just glad to finally hear us talk about the main problem that we have with our system of government.
Go on.
And I think it all boils down. We accept a system whereby the parties put themselves first before good governance. I mean, we think about it all the time. Whenever the parties were before to get elected, all the parties basically say, yes, we have to put ourselves forward to get into power. But then once we're in power, as this government shows clearly, they still carry on doing that and use the party whip to control the MPs. Well,
you're going deep on this and addressing those sort of slightly hefty questions I asked about what do they actually stand for and what is the point of Parliament. And that's not new. I don't think there's someone will know, Theo will probably buzz me. I can't imagine that it's ever happened before, where the government marched them up to the top of a hill on a Wednesday, got absolutely crucified by their friends and cheerleaders in the right-wing media. So marked them right back down again 2 weeks later, and somehow expects us all to not notice. That seems to me to be a moment of egregious hypocrisy.
I think you're right. I think it's progressively got worse over the last 20 years.
But there we may differ. So you say the last 20 years. What would be the starting point for you?
Well, to be honest, I don't know, but I used to follow...
Because some people would say weapons of mass destruction. I think the weapons of mass destruction dossier perhaps broke something about the trust between the population and the politician that has never quite been repaired. But I see, obviously, a 5-year window here when lies went unchallenged and lies were essentially rewarded, and the chief liars involved in the Vote Leave movement ended up getting promoted all the way into Downing Street. That broke something absolutely intrinsic, because it meant that the truth no longer mattered in any way, shape or form.
But then again, I think the whole, what we're seeing MPs do now has always gone on.
I don't know if it has, and I worry about that.
I don't think to the same degree,
no.
But I also think it's the amount of investigation that goes on now from certain people like yourself, from bringing it to the fore.
I'm an amplification rather than an investigation.
Well, yeah, but somebody needs to do it. I mean, you've actually brought me back to following politics. I studied British government and politics. I've always been interested in it, but as I say, I've just drifted away because I cannot stand the whole system.
Well, I'm glad I've brought you back. I don't know if you're going to thank me for it in the long run, or possibly your doctor.
Well,
your doctor might have a few words to say on the subject, but as long as we could keep the conversation alive and find things to smile about in the middle of it all, Mark, we'll be all right, I think.
Well, I am so... It annoys me all the time, because everything we have, and I think you hear it all the time from your callers and from you.
Yeah.
You constantly are saying, and basically what you are saying is our system of government doesn't work. We haven't just got a crisis because of COVID. That's a real crisis. Why have we got a crisis in housing? Why have we got a crisis in the prison system? Why have we got a crisis in the health system, social care, the legal system? It just goes on and on, because parties put themselves first. They care more about getting themselves in power, keeping themselves in power. And then, of course, they don't take long-term decisions. I also read science. Science is my big thing.
Yeah.
I've been reading about climate change for 35 years.
Yes.
This was in the 70s they had reports on this. And nothing is done until it becomes a public issue and a vote issue, and then...
Well, Boris Johnson was writing from the sceptic position as recently as 2015, of course.
I know.
And now he's off to COP26 again today to do a lap of honour and conveniently avoid some of the scrutiny that he might perhaps be exposed to by some of the stories that we are covering today. I don't want to agree with you, and I'm always conscious of not wanting to agree with someone, possibly prompting me not to agree with them, when if I was a robot or an algorithm, I would, allowing my feelings to influence my facts, as it were. But I don't think it's... I think the last 11 years have been particularly awful. And to defend the last Labour leader, which I rarely do, I don't think anyone could ever have accused him of being obsessed with achieving power or hanging on to it. It seemed to be the least of his priorities, to be fair. But it's the last 11 years, and for me, that referendum in 2016, which, you know, many of us said at the time, if you don't tell the truth about what they've claimed, what will they go on to be in charge of next? And now we know the answer, global pandemic. So what of all the stuff we've covered today lands most? Thank you, Mark. And I don't know whether I should accept it as a compliment or apologise for having lured you back into following politics more closely. But what is it that has hit you the hardest about all this? 0345 606 0973. I'll tell you what I'd pay for. Someone to explain to me why that particular story about marching them to the top of a hill on a Wednesday and insisting that they absolutely had to do it and it was the right thing and this is what our government represents, and then marching them right back down again 2 Mondays later and insisting that they had to do it and it was the right thing and it was about everything that our government represents. Someone explain to me how that is not horrific. Because I don't want to believe that it is, because I live here. 0345 606 0973, and I know what you're thinking. It's the mother of all heads and tails conundrums, isn't it? You know, we sussed this lot quite a while ago. They toss a coin, they shout heads and they shout tails, and then however it lands, they wave it under your nose and tell you that they were right all along and they've won. But they've never done it quite as blatantly as they have with this vote on standards, with this ripping up of the anti-corruption rule book. What day is it? Wednesday. Oh, top of the hill then. Absolutely have to be there. On pain of death, we'll fire if you're not there. What day is it now? 2 Mondays later. Straight to the bottom of the hill, please, lads. Anybody not at the bottom of the hill by tea time will be handed their sandwiches wrapped in a road map. Be out on their ear. I think that's insane. I honestly do. And weirdly, of all the stories that are somehow more enraging or more provocative, the 50 hours a week that John Redwood can spare, the 25 grand that Ian Duncan Smith gets paid, all of them. I could go on. I frequently do. Arguably, I already have. There's something about that reverse ferret happening in Parliament, not in a newspaper column. Oh, and that's what it is, isn't it? That is Boris Johnson's double column conundrum on the morning before he declared for Brexit, when he had a column prepared explaining why he was going to come out on the other side. That is now the modus operandi of his entire government. So they published one column last Wednesday when they voted it down, but the comment section's been awful. Oh my God. Sometimes it's so simple you can't believe you've missed it. So they published one column last week. That was the one saying we're going to rip up the anti-corruption rule book and give Owen Paterson a free pass. And then they read the comments and they decided, well, let's pretend we never published that. Let's publish the polar opposite next week. Oh, and this lot are so stupid, they'll let us get away with it. 10:53 is the time. We shall see. My feeling is, well, part of my feeling is built upon the knowledge that not a lot has landed over the last few years, but I think that was because of the sort of Teflon coating afforded by the Get Brexit Done slogan. I won't bore you with the details of that, because judging by the number of people that have watched that monologue from last Friday, you have almost certainly heard it, even if you weren't listening last Friday. But I am reminded increasingly of the expenses scandal. If it carries on like this, I don't know that it will have quite as long legs, and it is not as multi-party. I'm still getting texts saying, yeah, well, David Lammy presents a show on LBC, which is tragic, really, if you think it stands comparison with any of the other things that we've been talking about. And I think there is a case for letting MPs do some sort of work. The question is, what should they not be allowed to do? But the expenses scandal springs to mind because it was the idea that they thought it was okay that offended us so much, rather than they knew it wasn't, so they hid it, and then the doors got blown off and journalists filled their boots and the public went potty. That's a very different sort of scandal. The thing about the expenses scandal was they all thought it was okay. And that's the big common ground between these stories here about largely Conservative members of Parliament thinking it's perfectly okay to take money from all these companies and dedicate all these hours while ostensibly being MPs, disinterested MPs. They all think it's perfectly okay. And that's why I wonder whether historians of the future will see that comment from Owen Paterson. Well, I'd do it all again tomorrow. I'd do it all again in a heartbeat. That's been quite pivotal to this period of politics. I think it was, but I'm not a historian of the future. Well, not yet. Paul's in Hertford. Paul, what would you like to say?
Yes, good morning, James.
Hello.
Just wanted to point out that if you're the chairman of a select committee, you also get an additional allowance of £15,000 a year, apparently. And that's paid to the chairman. The other members of the select committee presumably have to do their work on the committee for no extra emolument. So
I don't know for sure.
Yes, I've looked it up.
You have?
Yes. The chairman gets paid.
I knew that. But there's no sort of bonus payment for the mere members of the committee. The chairman. So it's status plus extra work. Do you think the £15,000?
Well, it's work that's done in the House of Commons, where they're supposed to be representing their constituents, right, on a daily basis, presumably during normal working hours. So why should they be paid an additional $15,000? It's clearly then a role which, if you are that way inclined, you'd be angling to try to get yourself a chairmanship of a select committee
for the £15,000 and the kudos. But do we not then veer into territory that says the Prime Minister should get paid the same as the lowliest backbencher, the Secretary of State, the Foreign Secretary? They should all get paid a flat rate. Are we not swimming against the idea that once you're, like with any area of employment, once you're on the payroll, there's a sort of hierarchy that kicks in, and that where you sit on the hierarchy determines how much you get paid? I'm not defending it or attacking it at the moment. I'm just working it out with you.
No, I take your point, but I don't know for sure. But isn't a chairmanship of a select committee a job that you get either for the duration of a parliament or indefinitely until there's a reason for replacing you?
Yes, I think so. So you're suggesting that the temptation to be a chairman of a select committee might be informed as much, if not more, by the money on the table than by a particular interest in that area. Or I think you're elected to the chairmanship by the members of the select committee. Is that a sufficient check and balance to assuage your concerns?
Not so sure, because
well, no one elected Ian Duncan Smith to get £25,000 off this company that, lo and behold, got an amazing bit of business potentially out of the government task force that he chairs. Do you see what I mean? No one elected John Redwood to work 50 hours a month for an investment bank while still being an MP. So it doesn't strike me as being anywhere near as egregious as some of the stuff we've been talking about. But I could be wrong.
But if it involves time and effort, then it adds to your comment about where are they finding all the time to take on these private roles.
Oh, I see what you mean. Yes, well, that's why I said before you came on, I did say that there've got to be some jobs they can do on the side, so to speak. But when a job seems to be the main course rather than the side dish, one of Eddie's callers put this perfectly a couple of days ago on Eddie Mayer's show. They just said, how can it be the second job if it pays more than the main job? I think that's a fairly good question. So I would look at, Paul, I don't know whether you agree with this, I'd look at the number of hours involved, and there'd be a limit on what that can be. Hard to police, perhaps, but at least good for, optics. And secondly, consultancy seems to be the real problem here, doesn't it? What do you think the difference is between consulting and lobbying? What's the difference? Go on, have a go, because I've got a theory on this. Difference between consulting and lobbying.
Yes, Geoffrey Cox stepped down as the Attorney General in February of last year.
Yes.
And less than 18 months later, and then that was the Chief Legal Office, right, for the government, presumably in their investigation of what's going on in the British Virgin Islands. And 18 months later, he's batting for the opposite side.
He is. I don't know that is either. Is it consultancy work, legal advice? I don't know, actually. It's a really grey area, which is why you need a heck of a lot more light shone into all corners of these issues. I like the select committee point, because that leads us neatly into what we were going to discuss next, although many people are still waiting to contribute to this conversation. And that question is what jobs should be allowed, and some should be. You may well dissuade me from this position. The obvious one is the doctors doing shifts in A&E. Most people think of Rosanna Allen Khan at this point, but there are others. I don't think that a blanket ban on everything would actually be helpful, but I'd look at, A, how many hours it involves? And B, and this is the bit we'll look at next, what's the difference between lobbying and consulting? 3 minutes after 11 is the time, and this is a question that I've been tickling for a few days now, but it's a genuine question, but it's possible I'm being slightly facetious, because I think I might know the answer, but I'd love to hear your thoughts first, not least because I think I've filled more airtime in the last hour single-handedly than any other point in my entire broadcasting career. If I carry on like this, then Steve Allen is going to have to watch his back. I should be going after his crown as the only presenter on LBC who needs absolutely no input from anybody else at all. What's the difference between lobbying and consulting? So, I know what lobbying is in the sense of what Owen Paterson has been punished for. That is essentially intervening with ministers on behalf of companies that pay you. So what's the difference between consulting and lobbying? Hit the numbers now. You will actually get through. 03456060973. I'm not sure yet how or when we're going to move on from this. I just, as long as interesting questions keep throwing themselves up, I'll keep asking them, and you will hopefully keep answering them. There's no PMQs today, remember, at 12. So what's the difference in consulting and lobbying? And into that area, and also to go back to Paul's point, quite a lot of you are pointing out, although I don't think it's a criticism of Paul, quite a lot of you are pointing out that the chairmanship of a select committee is, you are working as a politician, as it were. There's no suggestion there that the motivation involves representing outside interests. There's no allegation of bias involved in pursuing that, or inappropriate. There's no way you could accuse you. There you go. There's no way you could describe it as lobbying or consulting, but it may be more relevant to some of the elements we're discussing. 5 minutes after 11 is the time. What is the difference between lobbying and consulting? I think that's really interesting, and I would also, I think, this hour like to keep afloat at least the sort of broad question of where it's left you. I don't really want to hear from people saying that none of it matters, even if you're right. Because although I've drawn parallels with the expenses scandal, the gulf, one figure I've seen is that £7.4 million is, I just thought it would be more than that actually, is involved in these kind of stories, and 6.8 million of it is from one side of the house. So it's not going to land like the expenses scandal landed. Whether your favourite example, your most egregious example during the expenses scandal, it could equally easily have been a Conservative, Labour or Lib Dem or any other member of the House of Parliament. So because the way the media works in this country, I mean, God knows what you'd be talking about this morning if you were still doffing your cap at this government. But if the media continues to be largely, at the very least, sympathetic to the Conservative cause, even as it appears to run out of patience with the current Prime Minister, perhaps temporarily, it's not going to land like the expenses scandal did, because almost all of the key offenders are from one side of the House of Commons, which is why I have to just keep adding for balance. David Lammy does a show on LBC every Saturday. And I don't know whether people genuinely think that is in any way... Or Claudia Webb as well. She's been convicted of harassment. She can't be recalled by her constituents in Leicester East because she's currently appealing that conviction. But she was suspended from the Labour Party the minute that charges were brought, and thrown out of it completely the minute the conviction was handed down. But that's exactly the same as the Conservative Party voting in their hundreds, not only to exonerate Owen Paterson, but also to rip up the rule book that convicted him. So, yeah, those two stories are absolutely heavyweights upon the scales of comparison between Labour corruption and Conservative corruption. And not for the first time I find myself wondering whether it's possible to die of sarcasm. Matt's in Glastonbury. Matt, what would you like to say?
Hello there.
Hello, Matt.
I just wanted to pick up, or not say Cambridge with, but speak up what one of your previous callers saying that this is what politicians do.
Yes.
And now I am, for want of a better word, a politician. I'm a district councillor.
Yes.
And there are lots of us up and down the country that are working to make our communities better, to make our counties better. And we don't get paid. I get an allowance every year of just over £4,000, which covers whatever stationery stuff. But this is my job. I've given up my work as a teacher previously to do this full time. I don't get paid. Now,
I think arguably you should. I just would add to your point by saying there are lots and lots of MPs who do good work as well.
Oh, absolutely,
they're
yes.
just generally not the ones,
for a moment.
not the household names increasingly.
That's right. They've become household names because of the stuff that goes on.
Yeah.
But I wanted to make sure that people recognise the fact that we're not all politicians. You can't tar us all with the same brush.
No, I agree.
There are many, many of us around that are doing our damnedest to do whatever we can for our communities. And my personal thrust is for education in Somerset. That's what my push is. But I'm not getting money for doing this. My gratification comes from, at the end of it, from seeing a product that I've worked on. I don't get.
Well, I think that's how Ian Duncan Smith feels about hand sanitizer, isn't it? And the 25 grand a year that he gets for it is just coincidental, really, incidental to the whole process. He's doing it for the love of hand sanitizer. Nothing at all to do with the fact that he gets paid money by hand sanitizer companies.
Yes, that may be part of the problem, that they don't realise that what they're doing is somehow egregious.
Yeah. No, but they really don't. Why do you think that is?
I think it's a culture, I'm going to get slated for saying this, but I'm afraid it's a culture within the Conservative Party, that nothing is worth doing unless there's a financial reward at the end of it. And
again, I would add that is not true of the entire Conservative Party.
Absolutely, yes, but it's a numbers game.
But the people we have been talking about, you would level that accusation at them.
Yeah. Sorry, say that again?
The people we have been talking about, the names on all of these lists, from Sir Geoffrey Cox down to Chris Grayling, that would be the accusation, is that they...
Yes, I would unreservedly say that. I mean, this chap that's been over in the Bahamas or wherever he was...
BVI, British Virgin Islands.
BVI, that's right, yes. And now everybody else in the country was locked down, couldn't go to Costa del Sol or whatever, but he's gone to over this place, and he's voting from over there in our parliament on our dollar, and that's okay, is it? Now, what part of your moral compass has to be broken before you realise that's not okay?
Well, I think you've already answered your own question, and whether or not it is double standards or whether or not they think anybody who's risen to the lofty heights that I currently occupy should be able to avail themselves of these impunities and freedoms. They think that they are entitled to behave in the way that they behave, and not to defend him, but I'm 99% certain he wouldn't have been in breach of any COVID regulations when he went there. I think he had to quarantine when he arrived, and even this lot, Matt, would probably not have had the front. I know they sit in the front bench not wearing masks while the government's official advice is to wear masks in precisely those contexts, and Johnson was in a hospital the other day, but I don't think any of them would actually have flown to the Caribbean in direct contravention of the government's own COVID guidelines. I think, I think we'd have heard about it sooner, and B, I don't think they're that stupid.
I agree, James, but we then come down to, again, the moral balance. There's a difference between following the letter of the law and following the spirit of the law.
Yes.
There are times where you've got to stop yourself. You bring yourself up and think, hang on, is this going to be stupid? Am I going to look a fool by doing this? Now, me personally, I don't want to bring it down to a party political thing, but I'm a Lib Dem, and I'm still getting slated for a decision over the tuition fees, which happened a decade ago, which is it's nonsense. It was a nonsense in the first place.
Well, it's not as if Nick Clegg's gone off to earn squillions of pounds working for Facebook, is it? That would really get your goat.
It would really screw the nail in. That's just ridiculous. Yeah. But what I'm saying is, why is there such a grievance against something that happened a decade ago? Which was, yes, it was a problem, but frankly, problems happen all the time.
And then we're back to my favourite subject, aren't we? Which is that the people are gaslit. So yes, every time a politician that the newspaper owners like does something that is pretty close to unforgivable, they start shouting about tuition fees or whatever, some misdemeanour or some misstep from 5-10 years ago that is supposed to be held up as evidence that they're all as bad as each other, which is, of course, leading us neatly back to the point you phoned in to make. They're not all as bad as each other, and it's actually really dangerous for democracy to say that they are. You know, David Lammy presents 2 hours of radio a week on LBC, and there are people desperate to pretend that that somehow stands comparison with what Sir Geoffrey Cox was doing in the blinking Caribbean.
Yeah. I have to say that it does come down to this ultimate thing, that what I call the dilution of democracy. So I'll stand next year for county. Maybe in a couple of years I'll stand for Westminster. Thank you. But if people know that when people know that I'm a Lib Dem, they'll say, "Oh, don't vote for him. He's a Fib Dem," or whatever nonsense they come up with.
You've got to let it go.
Yeah. So what they'll do instead is, we'll vote for the same old chap because that's a known quantity of corruption, rather than this other guy that might be a bit. You know, it might be a Fib Dem, but he might be all right. So let's just stick with what we've got. And it just becomes, or even worse than that, James, they'll say, "I won't vote anyway because the government always gets in."
And we had that call yesterday. And I'm going to translate what you've just said into fluent Dominic Raab-ese. And that is, well, if constituents have really got a problem with any of this behaviour, then they can make their feelings clear at the ballot box at the next election.
Yeah.
Suits them down to the ground. Well, unless you're Zach Goldsmith, of course, in which case you can be chucked out twice by the ballot box at the next election, 3 times if you include the London mayoral, and still end up a minister in the Foreign Office and a Lord in the House of Lords, or, as you might technically describe them, the Houses of Parliament. Thank you, Matt. And I stress that point. I know it sometimes might be difficult to believe, but I really do stress the point that not all politicians are bad. They are not all as bad as each other. Not all politicians are liars. And equally, in the interest of balance, back in 2015, Keir Starmer did legal work for Gibraltar, which is also a tax haven, you see. He was advising them on what the impacts of Brexit, I think, were likely to be, but he did it while he was an MP, and he did it for a British overseas territory that is a tax haven. So, you know, the reality of that is indisputable. The question is, how far would you have to bend over to pretend that it is equal and opposite to what Sir Geoffrey Cox has done? I mean, you might even struggle to make a case for suggesting he'd done anything wrong at all, but if Sir Geoffrey Cox is not allowed to do any legal work, particularly for an overseas territory stroke tax haven, then clearly Keir Starmer shouldn't be allowed to either. So that question, which is coming up next, of the distinction between lobbying and consulting becomes clear, and also the question of what should they be allowed to do. 0345 6060 973. It's 11:15. It's 19 minutes after 11. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where we continue to mull over the moment that we find ourselves in politically, a moment which I think is significant, but of course, whether it matters to you or not is also significant, but they don't actually cancel each other out. So I will refer back to America, if I may. A lot of the appalling conduct of Donald Trump didn't, quote, matter, end quotes, in the context of removing his support or persuading his cheerleaders to take a long, hard look at what the hell they thought that they were cheering for. So American media spent 4 years going, none of it matters, you know, whether it was the boasting about being an unconvicted sex offender, as he did when he described the approach he takes to women's genitals, whether it was mocking the parents of a war hero, or indeed a still alive war hero in the case of John McCain, whether it was mocking disabled people. I mean, crikey, where do you even start? And still they cheered, not just on Fox News. There were people in the UK media and UK Parliament, of course. One of my politician trolls, or one of the abusers of me on social media, very proud of her hashtag pro-Trump, despite being the MP for Morley, I believe. I presume she's removed it now. But it does still matter, because if you were to track back the coup attempt on January the 6th, you would realise that all of those signposts and stepping stones mattered, even if they didn't matter enough to make people remove their blindfolds and recognise the reality that was staring them in the face. Unless, of course, they did recognise the reality that was staring them in the face, but really liked it, but just recognised the time wasn't quite right yet to come out as an out-and-out supporter of a quasi-crypto-fascist coup. So these stuff matter. This vote next week matters. They vote in precisely the opposite way to how they voted last week, because it speaks of democratic decline. It speaks of democratic dilution. It speaks of an attack on and a contempt for our institutions, which I'm afraid is, once again, relevant to the F word. You know, they're trying to put their own person in charge of the broadcasting watchdog. They're trying to put their own people in post at the BBC. The Daily Mail at least, but no, they are going after lawyers, aren't they? They have just tried to decide they're going after the legal institution, they're going after the media, and you think it couldn't happen here. So it matters objectively. Here's a definition of matters. Will historians of the future write about this when they are describing the current malaise, whether people living in the current malaise recognise it or not? Answer, yes, of course they will. The enemies of the people front page that was personally presided over by the man they want to put in charge of the broadcasting watchdog was one of the most despicable things I have ever seen in any country's supposedly free media. Enemies of the people talking about judges. So now we'll reveal what that word is that runs through almost everybody that we're talking about today in the context of cronyism and corruption, like the word Blackpool runs through rock. Like anyone's still wondering. It's Brexit, isn't it? Anyway, consulting and lobbying. What is the difference? Michael's in Brentwood. Michael, what can you tell us?
Hello, James.
Hello, Michael.
Well, as I understand it, consulting is when the MP speaks to a company using their expertise to explain to the company how they should be lobbying. And lobbying is when the company pay the MP to then go and do what he's consulted with them to do.
You know, I should have briefed the producer on this, Michael.
Sorry?
I should have briefed the producer on this and on not to put you through quite so quickly. Because that's exactly what I think as well. But I wanted to get a few wrong answers up first, have a bit of fun with them, dance around a bit, a little bit of dance like a butterfly, sting like a bee, and then drop the bombshell that you've just dropped and say lobbyists are the ones that do it themselves, consultants are the ones that tell the business people how to do it themselves, but they're both essentially in exactly the same business.
They're often the same person.
I'm glad she put you through, after all. So, I mean, are we then talking about a ludicrous distinction? Possibly this might have been part of Owen Paterson's self-justification in that he thought, well, everybody does it. I just did it myself instead of telling them what to do. Well, instead of telling Mr. Randox what to do or Mr. Pork Products what to do, I just did it myself. And so why are they getting cross with me about? All I've done is do it. I've been more honest. I've been more upfront about what I'm doing, whereas they give advice to people who then go into the meetings with ministers to try to secure contracts and the rest.
But it's set up to be secretive. That's the whole point. If you do it in the open, then it's against the rules. If you do it secretively, they can hide what they're doing. I promise you, John Wedgwood, who is being paid by a finance company, has not brought any innovative ideas or inspirations in his 50 hours a year to that company. That's not what they're paying it for. He hasn't.
I think oddly, I think he has. Didn't he give? He does give actual investment advice. I'm pretty sure after the referendum he gave advice advising everybody to bail out on the pound as quickly as possible. God knows why. That would be advice that was given shortly after the Brexit vote that he was a cheerleader for. But he does give genuine I presume he was in investment banking before he became a politician.
But it's not a secret, James. It wasn't like nobody else in banking knew to do that. He's not the only one who can read the signs. He's not some guru. You don't see his name being splashed about.
Whoa, we're getting on well, but there are lines that one... You are suggesting that John Redwood is not some sort of genius?
Well, I can't prove that, but I feel that it's possible.
So, in conclusion, my lad, they can't consult. Well, I mean, what would be Ian Duncan Smith's field of expertise in the context of hand sanitizer, do we think?
I have no idea, unless he perhaps uses it to polish his head. I don't know.
Stop it. I shouldn't have laughed at that. I'm not exactly over-blessed in that department myself. At least Duncan Smith had the courage to go the whole hog, as opposed to the wispy coverage that I am still clinging on to desperately. As pointed out, I felt very unfairly by Martin Lewis, the money-saving expert. I was like, Michael, thank you very much. I'll keep the question on the board because it may admit a few more nuances and layers, but there it is. So this is genuinely what I think. If Keith's Cola is looking to get a big new bit of business, right? Keith's what else begins with C and might fit as an adjective? Keith's something cola. Keith's not delish. Keith's Cola. Keith's Coca-Cola. No, I've got nothing. Have you got anything? Oh, come on. We're usually quite good at this sort of wordplay. Keith's Cola Candy. Keith's Candy Cola. Keith's Candy Cola. No? Yeah? Okay, yeah. All right, so Keith's Cola, we'll keep it simple, is looking to get access to government. They want, they want some business, and they hire me, Job MP, to consult on their behalf, which means I sit down with Keith and I say, look, I'll get you in touch with them. Come to dinner, right, Keith? Come to dinner, and I'll also invite my mate who's the minister, right? And then when I'll do all of, how much is it a year again? 100 grand? Yeah, okay. So for 100 grand a year, I'll invite you and the minister to dinner, and then you can explain to him why Keith's cola should be the go-to cola for the entire British government, okay? And not only will I make sure you... Look, by the way, here's his mobile number. Make sure you get his... Yeah, there you go. His wife's name's Doris. She's lovely. Make sure you mention the Pekingese. So here this is consulting. Right, Keith, don't forget, Boris, Pekingese, is a big fan of Halifax Town Football Club. Do not mention the fact that they got thumped in the second round of the FA Cup by Kidderminster Harriers. That's a little bit of wishful thinking on my part. It's the game is still 2 weeks hence. But this is consulting, because I'm doing all of this when the minister isn't there. I'm doing all of this as an MP, but I'm not. And then Keith says to me, "Oh, can't you do it yourself? James, you're so good at all this stuff. I get a bit nervous in company. Can't you?" I cannot do it myself, Keith. That would be lobbying. Get behind me, Keithton. That would be lobbying. That's outrageous behaviour. But I am a consultant, therefore I'll tell you exactly how to do all the things that I would do if I was allowed to lobby. And that would be £100,000 a year, please. That's consulting. Lobbying is being in on a phone call with Keith's cola and the relevant minister and go, "Oh, yes, I think that's a great idea, Minister. This cola is delicious. May I mention that I drank 4 litres of it last night and I have never felt so footloose and fancy-free in my life. Positively perky I am, Minister. And it's so reasonably priced and so delicious. That's incredible. You should definitely buy Keith's cola by the VAT load." That's lobbying, so I can't do that. But I can sit down with Keith or go to board meetings or have, staged encounters at the Garrick Club. I've got to stop slagging off the Garrick Club. It's a very nice spot, actually. A stage encounters at my gentleman's club. It's just the Garrick Club was where Boris Johnson got a private jet back to so he could have a slap-up feed with fellow former Daily Telegraph columnists who included some of the biggest climate change sceptics in the country. So lobbying... Oh, Keith Classic Cola. Why didn't we go for Keith's Classic Cola? Thank you. So Keith's Classic Cola, lobbying involved, 3 Ks, Keith's Classic Cola. KK, oh no, that doesn't work, does it? You see, that's lobbying, so you can't do that, because that's like the Ku Klux Klan. That's a branding disaster. So it's KCC. You have to be very careful. This is why you pay me for the lobbying. Imagine if they're marching into a meeting with a minister with the same initials as one of the most infamous racist organisations in the history of humanity. I don't know who sent me that, but you're in trouble. I'm not reading you out again. So lobbying is advising Keith on getting his Classic Cola into all the schools in the country, because that's the contract he's after. I should have mentioned we want Keith's Classic Cola in all the schools in the country. Consulting is telling him how to do it. Lobbying is doing it on his behalf. I think that's it. Listen, if you think that's wrong, then I'll give you the money myself. And how can one be okay while the other isn't? Unless you can ring me now and explain precisely what expertise and insight Ian Duncan Smith can provide in the field of hand sanitizer. It's 11:30. Thomas Watts is here now with your headlines. 11:34 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. If you're just joining us, I'm exhausted. I've been detailing all the current allegations and accusations of corruption and or cronyism that the current government is facing. Scotland Yard is assessing a complaint. Now, Theo Ashwood has walked into the studio without being summoned. Now, last time this happened, he dropped a scoop that the rest of Fleet Street spent the entire weekend chasing up and following. Are we in similarly... Hang on, let me put my teeth in.
Sorry.
Are we in similarly exciting territory?
It's not a scoop, but this is a statement from Geoffrey Cox. And it turns out, James, that he told the government that he was going to go and work for the British Virgin Islands.
Here it is.
So here it goes. I'm just going to start from the top, and this is the statement. Sir Geoffrey Cox has practised as a Queen's Counsel in the court since well before his election in 2005. He's a leading barrister in England and makes no secret of his professional activities. He was asked to advise the Attorney General and the elected government of the British Virgin Islands, a British overseas territory, in a public inquiry into whether corruption, abuse of office or other serious dishonesty may have taken place in recent years in the Virgin Islands, and to carry out a review of its systems of government in preparation for that inquiry. Prior to accepting the role, he sought and obtained the approval of the office of the Attorney General of England and Wales that there would be no conflict of interest with his former role as Attorney General.
Ah, OK.
This is not to defend a tax haven or has been inaccurately reported to defend any wrongdoing, but to assist the public inquiry in getting to the truth. No evidence of tax evasion or personal corruption has been adduced before the inquiry, and if it had been, that person would have been required to seek their own representation. Goes on to say the statement that he regularly works 70-hour weeks and always ensures that his casework on behalf of his constituents, I'm quoting here, is given primary importance and fully carried out. Throughout this period, he continued to have online meetings with organisations, businesses and individuals within the constituency, and it made no difference to where he was, since it was not practical or desirable at the time to meet face-to-face. As to the use of the proxy, this is the voting when he was in the British Virgin Islands, prior to his visit to the BVI, he consulted the Chief Whip, that's Mark Spencer, Conservative Chief Whip, specifically on this issue, and was advised that it was appropriate.
So this is appropriate that he could do the work, that it wouldn't be a conflict of interest. So we still have to join the dots ourselves here.
No, he's saying it's appropriate here that he could go to the British Virgin Islands.
Oh, really? Specifically saying that the geography was appropriate?
Yes, as to the use of a proxy prior to his visit to the BVI.
And that was Mark Harper, who's not in post anymore.
No, that's... So no, this is Mark Spencer.
Oh, the current Chief Whip.
This current Chief Whip. Mark Harper was a Chief Whip from Theresa May's era. This is in April and May of this year. He consulted the Chief Whip specifically on the issue.
The question now, no, I understand that. The question now becomes, did Mark Spencer tell Boris Johnson?
His office is next door to Boris Johnson.
But did the government say, oh, that's absolutely fine, off you go to the Caribbean?
Well, I haven't finished the Should we see if there's... there might be more. I haven't read the statement.
I'm like Tigger, I apologise. What am I doing interrupting you, reading it live on the radio? This is a magical moment.
So Geoffrey's view is that it is up to the electors of Torridge and West Devon, that's his constituency, of course, whether or not they vote for someone who is a senior and distinguished professional in his field and who still practices that profession. That has been consistent view of the local Conservative Association. Every election, his political opponents have sought to make a prominent issue of his professional practice. It has so far been the consistent view of the voters of Torridge and West Devon. So Geoffrey is very content to abide by their decision. And of course, the reason that particular paragraph is important, James, is because the Prime Minister's spokesman yesterday, when he was speaking to Westminster journalists, including myself, was saying that it would be up to voters to decide.
And Dominic
Raab said it on the record, to decide whether Sir Geoffrey was an appropriate.
So this is the line that they're coming out with.
So this is another
25,000 majority currently in Torridge and West Devon.
As for the allegation that he breached the Parliamentary Code of Conduct on one occasion on 14th of September 2021 by being in his office while participating in an online hearing in the public inquiry and voting in the House of Commons, he understands that the matter has been referred to the Parliamentary Commissioner and he will fully cooperate with her investigation. That's Catherine Stone, by the way. He does not believe that he breached the rules, but will, of course, accept the judgment of the Parliamentary Commissioner or of the committee on that matter. So he's not going to do an Owen Paterson and ask his colleagues to come out and support him.
I saw a tweet earlier from I think it was an MSP or it was a SNP MP, and I can't find it now, but that suggested that this gets curiouser and curiouser. I'll find it. The suggestion was that they knew full well, that Downing Street knew full well about Geoffrey Cox, and the timing of this was down to them to distract attention from some of the questions that Boris Johnson is now facing, particularly, of course, about the Owen Paterson story. So, as a seasoned Westminster watcher...
The Chief Whip's office is in Downing Street.
Yes.
But
as a seasoned Westminster watcher, is it notable that this story miraculously appeared on the front page of the Daily Mail at around the same time, albeit that the Daily Mail framed it very much as a problem for Boris Johnson and continues to do so? This story appeared at around the same time. Well, so fast after the Paterson story? Is there? I mean,
so if you remember, of course, that the Owen Paterson story, the controversy was around the fact, and this was the difficulty for Number 10, was around the fact that number 10, on the advice of Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Commons leader, and Mark Spencer, the chief whip, came up with this quite elaborate plan that had one massive hole in it, which I'll come back to in a second, and that was to, in effect, create a new committee chaired by John Whittingdale that would create a new system for MPs, would rule on the Owen Paterson case, thereby protecting Owen Paterson. Yes. And of course, that new system, and this was the speculation from Dominic Cummings, the Prime Minister's former chief advisor, was that would, in effect, make Catherine Stone, the current Commissioner on Parliamentary Standards, her job obsolete.
And that's why he said so. They came out and said, well, I think our position is untenable, or whatever it was specifically.
Yes. So, and of course, that was causing a huge problem for Downing Street, because many Conservative MPs being whipped to go through the lobbies to support this plan, then were told, actually, no, sorry, we're not going to do this because of how it looks. And they were told, some of them, from what we understand, that they would lose money for their constituency if they did not support the government whips and vote with the government on this. And therefore, the real problem for number 10, James, was that many of them were felt that they were hung out to dry, that their post bags and email inboxes were full of furious constituents, and they'd been made to look...
Well, this was my penny drop moment today. You were probably too busy scrabbling around for stories, but this was the double column syndrome, wasn't it? So what you had was he wrote a column abandoning Owen Paterson. He wrote a column supporting Owen Paterson. He decided to go with the one supporting Owen Paterson. Then they read the comments under the column and they thought, oh my God, we've done a big boo-boo. Let's run out the other column, which is next week's vote, on actually going in exactly the opposite direction to the one that they went on under the whipping that you described.
So one of the dividing lines, of course, was that Conservative MPs who read the parliamentary, the committee's standards report on Owen Paterson realised how serious the egregious breaches that they're detailed were, realised that they couldn't possibly come out and support Owen Paterson, whereas other Conservative MPs who were close to Owen Paterson actually decided, well, he's part of our grouping, we need to stand by him.
A bit of the Brexity grouping, almost inevitably.
So they decided then to stand by him, and number 10, of course, on the advice of Jacob Rees-Mogg, and
sorry, I was going to say that's up there with Ian Duncan-Smith and hand sanitizer, isn't it? It's on the advice of Jacob Rees-Mogg, the man who went to Balmoral to mislead the Queen about the unlawful proroguing of Parliament. If the cap fits, doff it.
But just on the Owen Paterson case, Sir Geoffrey Cox is not going to go down this, but this is this statement is in effect Geoffrey Cox in summation batting the ball over the net back to number 10.
Feeling a bit hung out to dry?
Absolutely.
And saying, hang on lads, you knew.
You knew exactly what I was doing.
By all means.
You knew the arrangements. I was going to the British Virgin Islands. You said it was absolutely fine. You can't now nobody can now turn around and say how angry they are at me. And besides which, if you're going to say it's up to the voters of West Devon and Tory and West Devon, well, ever since it's never been a problem for them. And that's an issue.
Well. Curiouser and curiouser. Do we know where Geoffrey Cox is at the moment?
No, I can find out.
I'm sure someone told me that they've been told he wasn't in the country at the minute, which I thought would have been very bad. I've got to stop using this word optics. No, why should I stop? I like the word optics. Very bad optics. Okay. Where could he be? Could he still? Is the job in the BVI finished? No, I'm just wondering. These are rhetorical questions. Great work, Theo. Do you know what went down best yesterday with the listeners from all of your contributions to the programme?
What was that? The paddling pool. It was, wasn't it?
Apparently
we bought a very large paddling pool.
Apparently, I was in a hurry to get to the break, and you very plaintively said, because we got someone called Theo who rang in.
And we were saying about being the same age.
Rare to come across two Theos for the price of one.
Yeah.
And he'd bought an enormous paddling pool. Yeah. And you said apparently very plaintively as we headed to, I've got a paddling pool, and people loved that even more than they loved your correspondence political journalism.
Personally.
Well, you say that now. I'm afraid that the story is halfway around the world before the truth has got its trousers on. Theo Ashford, many thanks indeed. We may see him again. Who knows? The alacrity now and the frequency with which he barges through the door unprompted is it's a joy to behold. Who knows what might happen between now and 1 o'clock. The time now is 11:45. It is 11:49 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. So interesting developments from Theo Usherwood there regarding one of the names on my little list this morning. But there's still a heck of a lot of other names on it, and I would say that Cox's complaint there contention has caused the Prime Minister more problems than he already had. The Times runs through 7 potentially deadly controversies that could damage the PM this morning. I'll share them with you shortly. But if I tell you that the one that came in last would probably have done for any other politician in my lifetime, the one that is actually rated as having the lowest danger rating by the Times, I think would have done for any other politician in my lifetime, you'll get an idea of why I have been so worried for so long about the current direction of traffic. Currently represented by the cronyism and corruption allegations sweeping through the Conservative Party. Not, of course, I mean, some people very cross at David Lammy does a 2-hour show on LB. God, I've advertised Lammy like it's going out of family. You get that sort of advertising? I might have to invoice him. 11:51 is the take. Probably put it on expenses. That, by the way, is a joke. 11:51 is the time. William is in Berlin. William, what prompts you to call the programme today?
Hi, good morning, James. Big fan, firstly, for a long time, following all your Brexit stuff.
Thank you.
But on this particular point, I just wanted to make it very clear that I think precisely the line between consultancy and lobbying for MPs is very blurred, precisely because they are MPs, right? They are attractive to be consultants, in inverted commas, precisely because they are MPs.
Well, just to be clear, are you suggesting that Ian Duncan-Smith is not possessed of particular insights into the world of hand sanitizer? Because that's quite a hefty accusation you're laying at his feet there, William.
I realise. Well, that's exactly what I'm saying, yeah.
Well, blimey, OK, well, you know, just, Keith, alert the lawyers, will you? Make sure the lawyers are listening to this. You are, I mean, genuinely you think that perhaps, well, OK, you've said it now. So they are getting the consultancy gigs precisely because they are MPs.
Right, and, like, I think a way that you could get around it is if you would get not just them to say what their side job is, but to make them list exactly precisely what they do in an itemised way.
Yeah, that's a really good idea. An audit, essentially, of their efforts on behalf of their paymasters in this case.
Right, and like just to make it clear maybe the difference, like here it's similar rules in Germany, and for something I'm involved in, we had to consult a lawyer for something specific. We were recommended someone.
Oh, yeah.
I didn't know at the time, found out a year later he was actually a member of the state government here in Berlin.
Okay.
But he was an expert on that piece of law. So that's, like, fair enough, right?
Yeah,
But if you're just getting a job because you're, you know, I don't know, like you're a member of parliament, okay, fair enough. You have an expertise on perhaps certain elements of British law, that is fair. But if he's then involved in a company that is lobbying the British government, I don't see how you can say that there's not a blur there.
Nor do I. In fact, it is not unlike the expenses scandal. It is one of those scenarios where it's been hiding in plain sight. It was sort of known but not known, at the risk of sounding like the late Donald Rumsfeld. It is, I think, the scale of it and the audacity of it that is shocking people the most, not the existence of it. It's the extent, not the existence. There we go. I got there in the end. What are the rules in Germany regarding what we would file under consulting or lobbying?
Right, so it's actually surprisingly similar.
Okay.
I was just checking it before because I've had a bit of time to wait, so I was just double-checking. So basically, certain parties here, surprise, surprise, our equivalent of the Conservative Party, have many MPs who do side gigs. They have to declare it. They have to declare the exact amount of money.
Yeah, same.
But there's no rule in terms of how many hours or what it can be. And there were a number of scandals in the last year where, like, they were getting commissions for selling or for helping companies get mask contracts with the government. There was a huge connection with Azerbaijan.
Oh, that's how awful for Germany. Well, obviously, this is one of the great benefits of Brexit. Nothing like that could possibly happen here. So we're squeaky clean on that front. And you make the other point as well implicitly, which is that the giving legal advice that you are supremely qualified to give is very different from being paid to ostensibly give advice on hand sanitizer when really you're advising on how best to get through to government. So, but I'd still put an hours limit on it, actually, even if it turns out that John Redwood was a financial genius. The idea that he's got 50 hours a month to spend while also being a full-time MP seems...
Well, if I can just add one small detail there, is that until about 2 years ago, the state parliament here was a part-time parliament, and it was very strictly regulated the amount of hours that they could and had to work in parliament. So if you had, say, I think it was 25 hours a week or something that had to be available. So they did have, on paper, time that was extra.
Well,
so I have to say it is also different, and I agree with you. I think having some rules on hours would be extremely important, and maybe finding a way to itemise that more directly would be great.
Yeah, you say itemise, I say audit, but I think we're barking up the same tree. The problem is, and again, I have to take a step back sometimes. William, that was a perfect contribution. Many thanks. The problem is that I don't know. This is going to be a bit tricky. Make sure I get my words in the right order, at least. That's the least I can do, isn't it, in the circumstances? It's a question of trust, and the more we talk, the more we create a political framework in which we come from a position of MPs being guilty until they can prove themselves innocent. Now, I think they've brought this on themselves. I think the expenses scandal does once again spring to mind. But I quite like the idea of having a democratic system where we don't have to have really stringent rules in place for MPs taking money off private companies, because they're not going to try and behave as if they are, in the case of Ian Duncan-Smith, somehow supremely qualified to advise on hand sanitizer-related issues. Do you see what I mean? And so that puts more people off, but I don't know if it puts anyone off going into Parliament unless they were actually planning on being a bit dodge. But it's a bit like having children, isn't it? And you kind of hope that they don't need strict rules because they will behave sensibly themselves. Is that my tummy? Did you hear that? Yeah. I should probably have had some breakfast. But you do need... But then with children that are naughty all the time, thankfully I don't have any in that category, then you do need really strict... Do you see what I mean? So, unfortunately, we've ended up with a sort of delinquent kindergarten, haven't we? In Parliament, we've got a delinquent kindergarten on the blue benches in the House of Commons, with some offenders on the Labour benches as well. Well, not offenders as such, but some of them have second jobs as well. And probably, in full fairness, if they were in power, a lot more of them would have second jobs. I don't know that you get much money for advising on hand sanitizer if you're not actually in the party of government. But we are now looking at reframing our regulations to accommodate the fact that post-Brexit, Parliament, half of Parliament, has become a delinquent kindergarten. You can tell I'm pleased with that phrase because I've used it 6 times in the last 1 minute. Delinquent kindergarten. I've got all their albums. So yeah, anyway, just putting it out there. Last word on this, I suspect, to Rajesh, who's in Nottingham. Rajesh, what can I do for you?
Oh, hi, James. Thanks for having me on. My daughter would be proud.
What's her name? Should we say hello to her?
Oh, no, she's not here. She's at school.
No, I mean, you're not going to download the podcast later and boast about what a great day you've had, Dad.
You are rapidly becoming her bedtime story.
That's fantastic. What's her name? Let me say hello to her quickly for the tape.
Lorania.
Hey, Lorania. Yeah, you keep listening, seriously, and eventually you'll understand everything. That's the way it works. Back to Rajesh. What do you want to say, mate?
So I'm a consultant. My wife's an educational consultant, and we do consultancy work. And if people consult us, they will consult us for our opinion based on our professional experience and qualifications. And we will give them an opinion on that, which should be unbiased. Now, if then we try to exert undue influence for our client, for example, if my wife wants to influence the Department of Education or... So if I'm a hostile consultant, I could say, right, I'll try and pull some strings to, get you a better opinion or get you bumped up a list or something like that. So I think once you cross that boundary, which of course we don't, then you are lobbying. And I think there is a difference there. There's certainly a line that's crossed.
Well, you are a hospital consultant, which is a sort of pure version of consultancy, and unless I suppose that you were agitating to buy equipment that was made by a company that was paying you, the parallels are pretty hard to see, aren't they? I can't really imagine circumstances in which on a diagnostic level you could be corrupt.
Well, no, I mean, that's why I rang in. I've been trying to ring in for a few days and speak to you. It's great. But, so, for example, if a patient came to see me and said, right, I have this problem. Okay, fine, here's the diagnosis, here's an examination, et cetera, et cetera. And then they said, right, it's going to be 3 months, it's going to be 4 months. Is there anything you can do? Well, it should be based on the needs of that patient relative to the population, relative to everyone else. It should be balanced. It should be fair. And if you then say, well, actually, you're the cousin of my best friend and I'm therefore going to do something special for you, that would be morally wrong and therefore unfair and be considered, I suppose, in that context as lobbying. I mean, I'm not kind of,
No, I get it. No, it's a beautiful distinction and an important one. So, I again, with that little wrinkle that if you're not allowed to lobby, but I'm paying you to tell me how to lobby, then you might as well be lobbying. But that, again, is not going to... That might apply in your wife's world, but that's never going to apply in your world, really, is it?
No, I think that was your Keith Coconut Cola thing. I think you
Keith's Classic Cola.
You're the British version, Classic Cola. I went for the more exotic one, the Coconut Cola. No, but the last thing I wanted to ask you, though...
I don't think you can. Listen to the music, you see. It waits for no man. And that, of course, from Larania's point of view, that's great, because you'll have to ring in again. Make your second appearance on the programme in order to ask me a question, which I'm happy generally to take, as long as they're not sort of vaccine-y related red herrings. Speaking of which, we may move on to vaccines a little later in the next hour. The time now is 12 noon.